Why did they mock her bandaged leg, when they had no idea who she really was? The whispers began the moment she stepped off the transport bus. A low hiss, sharp as the wind itself, slithered across the frozen courtyard of forward operating base Kestrel. It was the kind of whisper that soldiers didn't need to raise their voices for. The air carried everything out here, the bite of cold, the sting of grit, the sound of derision. Her boot crunched against the packed snow, slow, measured, deliberate. Each step was steady, though the white bandage wrapped tightly around her calf betrayed something different, weakness. To the young eyes watching, it wasn't a badge of endurance. It was an invitation. "Look at that," a corporal muttered, his breath fogging. His name was Diaz, barely more than a boy, shoulders stacked with pride he hadn't yet earned. "They're sending us retirees now. What's she going to do? File reports until we surrender?" His friend snickered, a private named Chun, lips trembling in the cold. "Maybe she tripped over a keyboard. Command liaison, probably here to make sure our paperwork doesn't get buried before the next blizzard does." Their laughter blended with the wind, thin, brittle. She heard it all, every word, but she didn't turn, didn't correct them, didn't grant their ridicule even a glance. Her eyes were fixed on the centerpiece of the base's training yard. The wall, 90 feet of faux rock and jagged steel angles, iced at its crown, glittering like shattered glass. It wasn't meant to look possible. It was designed to break egos, to mimic the cliffs and peaks that ruled these mountains. And it was the first thing she studied. Her gaze traced its handholds, cataloged the obvious routes, then dismissed them. Her eyes slid across the negative space, where cracks and shadows hid quieter possibilities. She mapped the wall the way her mind had always mapped problems, not with frustration but with patience. A puzzle waiting for a hand steady enough, a body disciplined enough to solve it. The problem wasn't the wall, the problem was them. They saw her age, faint lines at the corners of her eyes. They saw the bandage, that stark flag of supposed infirmity. They saw a civilian designation stitched onto her simple jacket. Outsider, broken piece, extra weight. What they didn't see was the posture, the perfect stillness of her shoulders, the economy in her steps, the unnerving calm in her gray eyes. They didn't see the years layered into her silence, the discipline etched so deeply into her bones it didn't need to announce itself. So she let them mock. Like a climber ignoring loose rock, she let their words fall. She adjusted the strap of her duffel bag, canvas worn smooth from decades of use, and walked toward the command post. Her limp was faint, so slight most would miss it. But not these young men, trained to sniff weakness like blood. They latched onto it, built their conclusions around it. Noise, that's all it was, noise. And Lara Vance had long ago learned to filter noise from signal. The command post was spare, steel desk, tactical screen, weather maps shifting in cold blue. Colonel Madsen sat behind it, lean and severe, a man shaped by regulation and routine. He didn't rise when she entered. He only gestured toward the chair opposite, his eyes lingering on the bandage around her calf. "Miss Vance," he said. His voice was flat, economical. "No welcome, no warmth. I've read your file, or what little wasn't blacked out." She sat without hesitation, straight back, hands calm in her lap. "Civilian liaison for high-altitude operations. A mouthful," he continued, lips curling. "But the file doesn't tell me why you're here." "I'm here to observe and report on the base's readiness," she said. Even, simple, no edges for him to grab hold of. "Readiness?" he repeated, tasting the word with disdain. "I have a company of the fittest soldiers in the armed forces training in the most hostile environment on the continent. Our readiness is tested daily. What I don't have is time for bureaucrats." His eyes flicked back to her bandaged leg, a predator circling what he thought was prey. "What happened there?" "A minor training injury." Her tone didn't waver. The lie slid out with ease. He scoffed. "My men bleed on this mountain every day. They tear their muscles, they split their skin, and they get back to it. They don't get sent to observe. So tell me again, what use are you to me?" He dismissed her with the confidence of a man who had already judged her unfit. Lara felt something old settle over her: patience. The kind you cultivate when dealing with men who see the world only in binaries, strong and weak inside and outside. She had met hundreds like him. They believed strength was visible: muscles, speed, brute will. They never understood that true endurance was quieter, hidden, waiting. "My purpose," she said softly, "is to provide an external assessment. Command believes an outside perspective has value." He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Fine, you'll observe Sergeant Riley's recruits. Watch them scramble up the wall, write your notes, file your little report, just stay out of the way." She stood unshaken. "And Miss Vance," he added, voice dipped in condescension, "the mess hall is east. Try not to get lost." She closed the door behind her in silence. The fury in her chest was cold, controlled, banked low like coals hidden beneath ash. He had seen a broken administrator. He had no idea who he was really speaking to. That night in the cramped liaison office assigned to her, Lara unpacked her bag with mechanical precision. A notebook, a pen, a pair of thin gloves worn smooth. She didn't need more. Sleep was shallow. She rose before dawn, dressed simply, pulled a beanie low over her gray hair, and walked to the training yard. The recruits gathered, stamping feet against the cold, breath clouding like ghosts. Sergeant Riley towered in front of them, voice booming across the yard. "This wall will kill you if you disrespect it. The wind will peel you off, the ground will break you. Gear up, double-check your knots, and do not get fancy. Am I clear?" "Yes, Sergeant." The chorus was thin against the gale. Lara stood apart, notebook in hand, eyes sweeping the group with surgical detachment. Diaz moved with explosive force, powerful but sloppy, wasteful. He would burn out before the top. Chun was precise, careful, but his fear bled into every movement, too slow, too rigid. And O'Connell, pale, lanky, shaking, could barely look at the wall without blanching. Fear rooted him to the earth. She scribbled without looking up. Diaz over-leverage, poor conservation. Chun, tension, bleed, inefficient breathing. O'Connell, vestibular panic, needs balance training. When Diaz glanced down mid-climb, he caught her writing. He smirked, shouted something crude to Chun about being graded by the old lady. The others laughed. She didn't. Her eyes stayed on the wall, on the way the wind shifted around its overhang, on the subtle melt creeping across the eastern face, on the invisible pocket of calm near the top. She was cataloging survival while they were still cataloging jokes. The morning dragged on with drills. Riley barked. Recruits stumbled, scraped, froze halfway up. Lara watched it all with the same calm she'd worn since arrival. But something unsettled her. A storm was coming. Not the whispers, not Madsen's disdain. The sky itself, clouds rolling in sharp, fast. The air tasted different, metallic, electric. She jotted one last note in her book and snapped it shut. She had seen storms like this before, and storms never came alone. Not here, not in mountains like these. Why did the storm arrive so suddenly? One moment the sky above Kestrel was sharp and clear, a hard, endless blue cut by the spires of mountains. The next it was slate, heavy, angry, the kind of sky that didn't ask permission before it broke. The recruits were still clinging to the wall when the wind shifted. Not the steady, bitter wind they had grown used to, but something jagged, chaotic, violent. It pressed into them like a hand determined to tear them free. Snow came, but not like a postcard. Not gentle, not soft. It slashed sideways, a white curtain driven horizontal. The kind that blinds you in seconds, the kind that swallows landmarks until even the 90-foot wall became a gray phantom. Then the alarm screamed. All personnel to designated shelters. Whiteout conditions inbound. Repeat, all personnel to shelters. The recruits scrambled, Sergeant Riley barking them down with the fury of a man trying to hold order against nature. But Lara, she didn't move. In her office, she had been bent over a topographical map when the siren wailed. She rose slowly, unhurried. She knew the shape of this storm already. The mountains had told her. They always told you if you learned how to listen. From the small, reinforced window, she watched the wall vanish, swallowed whole. Her breath fogged the glass. She could feel it deep in her chest. The storm wasn't just weather. It was a test. The lights flickered, then died. The hum of the bass went silent. Seconds later, the red glow of emergency power bled into the corridors. In the command post, panic hummed low but steady. Radios spat static. A communications officer's voice cracked with strain as he spoke into a dead headset. "Command, this is Kestrel. We've lost primary power. External comms down. I say again, down." Only silence answered. Colonel Madsen stormed into the room, face set in stone. "Status." "Blackout, sir. Backup's online, but the relay tower isn't responding. Main antennas down." Madsen's jaw flexed. "Patrol Bravo." "They were scheduled to check in 5 minutes ago. Ridge, 2 clicks north. We've got no contact." No contact. In this weather, no contact meant one thing: men alone in a whiteout, men walking blind toward death. Madsen's eyes locked on the tactical map projected against the wall. "Where's the relay tower?" "Mounted adjacent to the training yard, sir, on the pylon above the wall." His gaze darkened. Someone had to climb, reconnect it, in this storm. "Get me Sergeant Riley." Moments later, Riley stomped in, snow dusting his shoulders, eyes hard. "Relay down," Madsen snapped. "We've got a patrol cut off on that ridge. I need your best climbers." "Sir," Riley hesitated, not fear, just brutal honesty. "In this wind with the ice, it's suicide." "We don't have a choice." Madsen's voice was steel. "Failure is not an option. Get it done." Riley's eyes flicked once to the storm outside, then back. He nodded. Grim, he was a soldier. Orders were orders. "Diaz Chun, gear up." The 2 young men went pale but obeyed, fumbling with insulated harnesses and ice gear. The laughter of yesterday was gone. This wasn't a joke. It was a climb into the throat of a hurricane. And Lara stood silently in her doorway, watching. Her pulse was calm, steady. They didn't see it, but her mind was already solving the problem. Wind shear angles, torque on frozen steel, the timing between gusts. It wasn't chaos to her. It was a pattern. Outside, floodlights cut into the swirling snow. 3 figures crouched at the base of the wall. Riley, Diaz, Chun. "Diaz, you're on point," Riley shouted over the roar. "Use the maintenance ladder, forget the holds, 2 iced over, move." Diaz started up, boots slipping on rungs lacquered with verglas, gloves clawing for grip. His breath came harsh and ragged, swallowed instantly by the gale. 10 feet, 15, 20. Then a gust slammed him sideways. His body peeled from the ladder, dangling. He caught himself with a choked yell, clinging by raw desperation. "I can't," his voice broke. "I can't get a grip." "Use your axe, chip the ice," Riley barked. Diaz fumbled at his belt, pulled the tool, swung. The wind hit again. His boots lost purchase. His body slid down 5 feet, metal shrieking against his gloves. He hung there, teeth rattling, terror flooding his voice. "I can't do it, the wind." Inside the command post, the thermal camera displayed his heat signature trembling against the ladder. Madsen's hand clenched the edge of the console. "Get him down," he ordered, voice strained. "Chun, you try." Chun stepped up, eyes wide, movements hesitant. He climbed slower, more careful, too careful. The storm punished hesitation. Ice glazed his gloves, sapped his strength. He made it barely 10 feet before shaking his head and retreating, defeated. Riley himself started forward, shoulders set, determination etched deep. But when he looked up, really looked at what lay ahead, the ladder rising into the throat of the storm, even he faltered. just for a second, but enough. And that was when Lara moved. Until then, she had been a shadow in the doorway, silent, unseen. But now she stepped forward, each motion deliberate. She crossed the room until she stood in front of Madsen himself. "I can do it," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the chaos like a blade. Madsen turned. Disbelief hardened his face. "Don't be ridiculous, Vance. This isn't a drill." "I'm aware," she replied, her gaze steady, unwavering. "Your men are strong, but they're fighting the wind. That's why they'll lose. You don't fight it, you use it." Something in her tone stilled the room. Calm certainty, not arrogance, not bravado, just fact. Madsen's throat worked. The patrol was out there dying. His best climbers had failed, and in front of him stood the last option he never wanted. "This is insane," he muttered, but desperation chewed at his conviction. "Fine, try, but if you get stuck, I won't send anyone after you." "I won't get stuck." She turned, stripped off her insulated jacket to reveal a dark thermal layer beneath. Her body moved with efficiency, nothing wasted. She passed the medic station, snatched a roll of tape, reinforced the bandage on her leg. Not for protection, just to keep it from snagging. Outside, Riley spun toward her, eyes wide. "Ma'am, you need to get back." "The colonel sent me." Her voice was calm, final. She slipped on a pair of thin, battered gloves from her pocket. Not issue gear, personal, worn smooth with time. And she walked straight past the ladder. Straight to the wall. Diaz's voice cracked over the wind. "What the hell is she doing?" Her palms pressed flat to the icy rock. She breathed once, deep. Then she began to climb. Not with force, not with frantic energy, with flow, with conversation. Her body folded into the storm's rhythm. She moved when the wind lulled, braced when it surged. Her bandaged leg wasn't weakness, it was pivot, counterweight. Her balance was precision incarnate. She found holds no one else had seen. A crevice barely wide enough for 2 fingers. A frozen lip that could cradle the edge of her boot. She didn't fight the mountain. She listened to it. Back in the command post, the thermal feed showed a small shape ascending with impossible grace. The room fell silent. No one breathed. 50 feet, 60. She reached the pocket of calm she had mapped that morning, pressed close to the rock, eyes closed for a single breath. Then she continued. At the top, she swung onto the ledge. The storm whipped around her. She moved to the antenna, hands bare now, working with speed and certainty. Ice shattered, metal shifted. With one sharp torque, the dish realigned. A console beeped. "Sir, we've got a signal," the comms officer shouted. "Patrol Bravo is online." On the feed, her body rappelled down in one fluid descent. No hesitation, no fear. She touched down on the snow as lightly as if she'd stepped off a curb. For a long, frozen moment, no one spoke. The storm howled, the soldiers stared. And the woman they mocked stood in silence, snow dusting her hair, her bandaged leg stained faintly red. The mockery was gone. In its place, something heavier, something quieter. Oh! Why did silence feel heavier than applause? Inside the command post, no one spoke. The wind howled outside, rattling the steel walls, but within the red glow of emergency lights, there was only stillness. Diaz and Chun stood dripping by the door, faces pale, arrogance stripped raw. They had mocked her just yesterday, laughed at the bandage, and now they looked at her like she was something they couldn't explain. Not a civilian, not weak, not even human, maybe. Sergeant Riley followed them in last, pulling off his hood. His jaw worked silently as he stared at her. He knew walls. He had studied that climb for years, yet what he had just witnessed didn't fit into any frame he understood. Colonel Madsen finally broke the spell. His voice cut through, clipped, sharp but different now. "My office, 10 minutes." It wasn't dismissal, it was summons. Lara gave a single nod. No triumph flickered in her face, no pride. She simply took a cup of hot water from the dispenser, cradled it between her hands, letting warmth seep into her chilled fingers. Her bandaged leg throbbed, a slow drumbeat beneath the fabric. She ignored it. Pain was just signal, not noise but not command either. A timid voice broke the quiet. "Ma'am." She looked up. O'Connell, the lanky recruit who couldn't lift his eyes to the wall, stood in front of her. His face still pale, but his gaze different now. Searching. He swallowed hard. "I've never seen anything like that." Her gray eyes softened for the briefest moment. "Everyone has their own wall to climb, Private. Find a different way up." He blinked, stunned by the simplicity of it, then nodded. She left him with that and turned toward Madsen's office. When she entered, the air was thick with unspoken questions. Madsen didn't sit. He paced, jaw tight, eyes flicking from her to the tactical display glowing against the wall. "You're no bureaucrat," he said at last. She didn't answer. The comms unit crackled. "Colonel, update on Patrol Bravo. Drone confirms they've found shelter in a ravine, but we have a man down, Corporal Jenkins. Possible spinal injury." Madsen's face hardened. "Extraction." "Negative for air evac. Winds too unstable. A ground team could reach them, but moving a spinal case through that terrain," the officer hesitated. "High risk of paralysis. Medics recommend horizontal litter traverse. We'd need a line across the ravine." Madsen turned slowly, eyes sharp as blades. "That's a high-angle rescue, specialist work." He didn't look at her, not yet, but she felt the weight of the silence pressing toward her. Her gaze flicked to the 3D topographical map. The ravine was a scar across the earth, 80 meters wide, south edge unstable shale, north solid rock. Wind sheer at the lip, 40 knots. She traced it with her eyes, her mind already solving. "You don't use one anchor," she said quietly. Madsen froze. "You use 3. A distributed system across the shale. Spread the load. On the north side, you rig a Z-drag pulley for the haul, separate high-tension guideline for stability. You'll need tag lines from below to stop the litter spinning." The room stilled. Her voice wasn't suggestion, it wasn't guess. It was certainty. Madsen stared at her. For the first time, doubt crumbled completely from his face. He had been looking for a specialist. One was sitting in his base all along. "You can direct this?" he asked. She met his eyes. "Yes." He nodded, decision sharp, irreversible. "Sergeant Riley and his 2 best men are yours. You'll lead the rescue." No hesitation, no debate, orders were given. Minutes later, the transport skimmed across the snowfields, its treads grinding through drifts toward the ravine. Inside, Riley sat rigid across from her, Diaz and Chun beside him. None of them spoke. The roar of the engine filled the silence. But their eyes, when they flicked toward her, carried something new. Not mockery, not even curiosity. Respect edged with fear. The vehicle halted at the staging area. They dismounted into screaming wind. Ahead, the earth split open, the ravine, its sides jagged, snow whipping in vortexes across its mouth. Patrol Bravo huddled at the bottom, visible through drone relay. Cold, battered, one man unmoving. Time was bleeding away. Lara's voice cut across the gale, low but absolute. "Diaz 3 V-thread anchors here, even distribution." He obeyed without question. No swagger now, only precision. "Riley Chun north side, primary lines, double-check every carabiner." They moved fast, focused. She was everywhere at once, kneeling to test an anchor with a hammer tap, tightening knots with worn leather gloves, scanning the system like an artist adjusting strokes. Chun fumbled a carabiner. She didn't snap, only said, "Take your gloves off for the delicate work. Pain is temporary, a failed gate is permanent." He obeyed instantly. An hour passed, each minute stretched thin by the storm. The system grew from the snow like a web of steel and rope, elegant, deliberate, unshakable. And then came the thump of rotors. A heavy transport helicopter descended through a break in the clouds, landing 100 meters back. Its ramp lowered. A figure emerged, walking with a purpose untouched by the storm. Elias Thorne, Master Sergeant, a legend in the special operations world. His face was a map of battles fought, scars earned. His eyes scanned the scene, the intricate rigging, the soldiers working under absolute focus. Then they landed on her. And he stopped. His expression cracked, disbelief flooding into something else. Recognition. He turned to Madsen, who had followed from the command vehicle. "You said a civilian was leading the rescue," Thorne rumbled. "That's right," Madsen replied, still unsure himself. "A liaison, Vance, she's capable." Thorne's laugh was short, harsh. "That's no civilian, Colonel, that's no liaison." Madsen frowned. "Then who?" Thorne's gaze never left her. His voice dropped, heavy, reverent. "That's Wraith." The name cut through the storm like a shot. Riley froze mid-knot, head snapping up. Diaz and Chun exchanged stunned looks. Wraith. The ghost story whispered through training halls. A specter of impossible climbs and missions no one else could finish. A legend who had vanished years ago. And she, gray hair, bandaged leg, calm hands on the ropes, hadn't denied it. She only looked back at Thorne, and in her eyes, history lived. Why did the name alone silence even the storm? Wraith. The word carried weight heavier than snow, sharper than wind. It was myth, whispered through training halls, a ghost woven into the fabric of impossible missions. And now, standing in the blizzard with ropes in her hands, she wasn't myth at all. She was flesh and blood, her gray hair pulled back, her bandaged leg braced against the ice. Sergeant Riley's eyes locked on her, disbelief tangled with something deeper, reverence. Diaz and Chun worked silently, their earlier mockery scoured clean. They weren't just following orders anymore. They were following a presence. Lara didn't look at them. She didn't need to. Her focus was absolute. Diaz anchor's sound. "Yes, ma'am," he barked, voice tight with focus, not arrogance. Riley, Northside Stable. "Locked in, double-checked." She nodded once. "Good, the system will hold. Now listen closely." Her voice cut through the wind, low but unyielding. "This traverse isn't about strength, it's about precision. Smooth, steady haul, no jerks, no rush. Jenkins' spine can't take shock. Tag lines tight, keep him level. If the litter spins, you fight it down. Understood?" They answered in unison, a chorus of certainty. The storm didn't stop. The wind didn't care. But in that moment the team was steady. The litter descended into the ravine, guided by the web she had built. Ropes groaned, ice cracked, but the system held. At the bottom, 2 soldiers secured Corporal Jenkins, strapping him into the stretcher, stabilizing his neck. His face was pale, lips blue, but his eyes flickered open once. Fear lived there, fear of never walking again. "Easy, Jenkins," Riley called down, his voice gruff but steady. "We've got you." The haul began. Inch by inch the stretcher rose. The wind caught it, tugged hard, but the tag line snapped taut, holding it true. Lara's gloves were raw, her fingers stiff, but she moved with precision, guiding, correcting, commanding. Diaz's arms trembled with strain. His breath tore ragged from his lungs. "I can't." "You can," Lara said sharply, eyes cutting into him. "Pain is noise, ignore it. Focus on the line." Something in her tone reached him. He bit down, locked his jaw, and pulled. Chun slipped on the ice, nearly losing his grip on a tag line. Fear flashed across his face, the same paralysis that had once frozen him on the wall. "Private," Lara snapped, steady as stone. "Breathe, 1 breath in, 1 breath out, now move." He did, his panic shrank under her command. His hands steadied. The stretcher rose higher. Every inch was war. Every gust threatened to undo it. But Lara's voice threaded through it all, calm, deliberate. The storm was chaos, she was pattern. Halfway up, the wind screamed harder, ripping the stretcher sideways. Ropes strained. Anchors groaned. Riley swore under his breath, muscles taut as he fought the spin. "It's slipping," Diaz shouted. "No, it's not." Lara's voice was iron. She moved to the anchor, eyes sharp, adjusting the pulley angle with her own gloved hands. The system realigned, tension redistributing. The spin stopped. The litter steadied. Riley looked at her with something close to awe. "How the hell did you see that?" "I've seen worse." Her tone was flat, but her eyes were far away, staring not at the ravine but at another place, another climb. Kandahar, a roof slick with blood and dust, a rope snapping in darkness, shrapnel tearing into her leg. The choice she had made then, to save one life, even if it cost her own. The bandage on her calf throbbed, but she anchored herself in the present. Jenkins was rising. That was all that mattered. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then, with a final pull, the litter crested the ravine's edge. Soldiers grabbed it, securing it to the snow. Jenkins was safe. The team collapsed to their knees, chests heaving, hands raw. Riley wiped snow from his face, staring at the stretcher, then at her. It had worked. Against odds, against storm, against fear, it had worked. But Lara didn't rest. She moved to Jenkins, knelt beside him. His lips trembled, his eyes glassy with pain. "You're going to make it," she said quietly, her voice meant for him alone. "The hardest part is done." He blinked at her, tears mixing with snowflakes. Gratitude filled his eyes. The helicopter's rotors thundered as medics rushed forward, loading him inside. The ramp closed, engines roared, and within moments the machine lifted, vanishing into the storm. Silence fell again. This time it wasn't shock, it was respect. Every soldier turned toward her, not as a civilian, not as a liaison, but as something else, something they couldn't define, only feel. Colonel Madsen walked across the snow, his boots crunched with deliberate weight. He didn't look at Riley, or Diaz, or Chun. He walked straight to her. And there, in the howling wind, he stopped. His hand rose to his patrol cap, slowly, deliberately, a salute. Not protocol, not rank, respect. The soldiers followed, one by one like a ripple across the frozen ground. Riley first, jaw tight with humility. Diaz, eyes wide with something that bordered on reverence. Chun, shoulders squared for the first time. Even O'Connell, trembling but steady, brought his hand to his brow. A line of salutes, silent, solemn, offered not to a superior officer, but to a figure who had proven herself beyond measure. Lara met Madsen's gaze. For a heartbeat, her expression didn't change. Then the faintest nod. It was enough. Thorne stood to the side, a rare smile cutting through the weathered lines of his face. He walked toward her, boots heavy, eyes bright with history. "Never could stay retired, could you, Wraith?" he said, voice low, carrying more than words. For the first time since she'd arrived, Lara's lips curved, barely, a ghost of warmth. "Just observing Elias." The storm eased, sunlight pressing weakly through clouds, as if the world itself exhaled. But inside she felt none of the triumph they projected onto her. No victory, only the familiar ache in her leg, the burn in her lungs, the knowledge that this wasn't glory, it was necessity. One life saved, 100 more waiting somewhere else. She wasn't legend, she wasn't ghost. She was just a soldier who refused to stop climbing. Why did victory always taste like ash? The rescue was done. The ropes were coiled, the litter was gone, the storm retreating with reluctant growls. A pale sun broke through the clouds, painting the mountains in silver. Soldiers lingered at the edge of the ravine, their breaths ragged, their eyes fixed on her. But Lara Vance felt nothing close to triumph. Her leg pulsed with pain. Her chest ached from the climb, from the storm, from the weight of silence. Respect hung heavy in the air, yet inside her, an old truth whispered. Respect wasn't the same as peace. She stood a little apart, snow clinging to her hair, her gloved hands raw and stinging. She kept her breathing even, steady. Control was her armor. Thorne approached. The master sergeant's boots sank deep into the snow. his frame still as solid as the legends told. His eyes, sharp and weathered, studied her not with surprise anymore, but with recognition. "You really couldn't stay buried, could you?" His voice rumbled low, words heavy with memory. She didn't answer. "After Kandahar," he continued, "I thought you were gone. Everyone did. They said you took the shrapnel, retired, quiet, vanished." He shook his head, snow scattering from his shoulders. "But here you are, same eyes, same calm, still Wraith." The name curled in the air like smoke. Soldiers shifted when they heard it, pretending not to listen, but their ears caught every syllable. Lara's gaze lifted toward the peaks. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. "Wraith died in Kandahar." Thorn snorted, but there was no mockery in it. "Tell that to the men who just saluted you." Her hand flexed against her side. The scar under her bandage throbbed not from cold but from memory. She could still see it. The night sky shredded by fire, the rooftop collapsing beneath her. The moment she chose to push another soldier toward safety instead of saving herself. The explosion that carved shrapnel into her leg, ending her career in an instant. She had woken up in a hospital bed, told she was lucky to walk. But she hadn't felt lucky. She had felt unfinished. That was why she had disappeared. Not for peace, not for healing, but because she no longer belonged anywhere. Too broken for the field, too restless for retirement, a shadow caught between lives. "Elias," she said softly, still staring at the mountains. "I didn't come here to be found. I came to watch, to observe, to remind myself what the fight still looks like." Thorn's jaw tightened. He had seen too many ghosts wearing uniforms. "You think you can stand at the edge forever, just watching?" She turned her eyes on him then, gray, unyielding but carrying something fragile beneath. "It's safer that way." He studied her, a man who had carried his own scars, his own ghosts, and for once he didn't argue. Behind them, Colonel Madsen approached. The storm had scoured the arrogance from him. His salute earlier had been no act. His face was still severe, but now it carried something else, humility. "Vance," he said, his voice steady, "or should I say Wraith?" The soldiers froze again at the sound of the name. Riley's head snapped toward her. Diaz and Chun exchanged another glance, still stunned. Lara's jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter what you call me, Colonel. My work here is done." Madsen shook his head. "No, it is." He glanced toward the ravine where Jenkins had been lifted away. His voice lowered, as if confessing something to himself as much as to her. "I mocked you, I dismissed you, and you saved one of my men when my best couldn't. That isn't observation, that's leadership." Her gaze didn't waver. "Leadership ends, legends fade, you know that." Madsen stepped closer. "Then why are they still looking at you like you just rewrote their world?" Her eyes flicked past him. The recruits, Riley, Diaz, Chun, even O'Connell, still watched her from a distance. Not with mockery, not even curiosity anymore, but with something heavier, a desperate kind of hope. She looked away. She couldn't carry that hope, not again. "Colonel," she said, her voice even, "file your report. Say the base is ready. Say your men are strong. That's what command wants to hear." "That's not what I want to say," Madsen replied. His voice softened, breaking through the steel edges. "I want to say you belong here, that these soldiers need you, that I need you." For the first time her composure flickered, not from pride, from conflict. Because a part of her, the part she had buried under years of silence, wanted to believe it, wanted to belong again, to teach, to guide, to matter in more than shadows. But another part remembered Kandahar, the fire, the pain, the way her leg had buckled under her when she tried to stand, how she had crawled through blood to drag herself out. She remembered the silence that followed, the long days where no one called her Wraith anymore, just Lara Vance, retired, broken, forgotten. She couldn't be both. Thorn must have read it in her eyes. He stepped forward, his voice rough but gentler than before. "You think you disappeared because of that leg, because of the injury. You're wrong. You disappeared because you were afraid of being needed again, afraid of failing when it counted. Her breath hitched so slight no one else noticed, but Thorn did. And he was right. She turned her gaze away, back to the peaks rising like jagged blades against the sky. "You think I was afraid," she whispered. "Maybe I was, but fear keeps you alive. It reminds you you're not invincible." Thorn nodded once. "True, but it doesn't remind you you're still human. That's what this did today." He gestured to the ropes, the anchors, the tracks in the snow where Jenkins had been pulled to safety. "That soldier's alive because of you, and every one of them knows it." Silence hung heavy and raw. The sun finally broke through, casting long shadows across the base. The storm was truly over now, the air sharp but clear. Soldiers began moving again, breaking down the rigging, hauling gear, but their eyes kept flicking toward her. Not because she was Wraith, not because she was legend. Because she had proven something they couldn't explain but could never forget. Madsen exhaled, his breath a pale cloud. "I don't care what command thinks, you're not done here." Lara didn't argue. She only turned, picked up her duffel, and began walking back toward the base. The limp in her step was more pronounced now, pain pulsing beneath every stride. But her back remained straight, her head steady. And behind her, soldiers who had once mocked her bandage watched her leave with reverence carved into their faces. The mountain wind carried their silence, not scorn, not laughter. Respect. But inside her chest, the question still burned unanswered. How long can a ghost walk among the living, before vanishing again? Why did walking away feel heavier than climbing the wall? The storm had passed, but its mark lingered. Fob Kestrel stood under a sky scrubbed clean, the mountains glittering sharp against the horizon. Snow lay unbroken, pristine, except for the scars carved by boots, ropes, and the desperate scramble of men fighting against the blizzard. Inside the mess hall, warmth hummed from heaters. Soldiers crowded tables, voices low, eyes flicking again and again toward the corner where Lara Vance sat alone. She ate slowly, mechanically, each motion calm. No one mocked now, no one dared. Diaz whispered something to Chun, who shook his head quickly, eyes darting toward her. Even O'Connell, who had once struggled to raise his eyes to the wall, now sat taller, braver, as if her climb had lifted some invisible weight from his shoulders. They were learning. She saw it in the way they carried themselves, the way silence grew heavier whenever she entered a room. It wasn't worship, it was realization. They had seen what was possible. But Lara didn't bask in it. She kept her gaze on her plate, her thoughts elsewhere. Respect was a currency she had long ago stopped spending. When the meal ended, she left quietly, the low murmur of voices following her into the cold. Colonel Madsen was waiting outside. "Vance," he called, his tone different now. Not commanding, not mocking, something else uncertain. She stopped, her duffel strap slung across her shoulder. "My office," he said, "now." The room was warmer than it had been the first day, or maybe that was just him. Madsen didn't stand behind his desk this time. He paced slowly, like a man trying to measure words before using them. "I've put in a request to command," he said finally, "for a new position here, high-altitude special tactics instructor, permanent." Her eyes lifted to meet his, steady, silent. "They need someone like you," he pressed. "Not just the recruits. I need someone like you. You saw things I didn't. You solved problems I couldn't. That climb, that rescue." His voice faltered, not with weakness but with sincerity. "You changed this base in 2 days more than I could have in 2 years." For a long moment she didn't respond. The silence stretched. Finally she said, "Colonel, I came here to observe, nothing more." Madsen's jaw tightened. Observation doesn't save men from dying in ravines. Observation doesn't rewire a company's spirit. You didn't just observe, you led. Her gaze flicked toward the window where the training wall gleamed under sunlight. Leadership isn't permanent, it ends. And when it ends, the soldiers left behind carry the weight. not the leader. Maybe, Madsen admitted. But without you, Jenkins would be dead. Diaz and Chun would still think arrogance and hesitation are virtues. Riley would believe strength means brute force. You showed them different. You taught them, whether you meant to or not. Her lips pressed together. It was dangerous, what he was saying. Dangerous because it touched something she had locked away. Belonging. Thorne entered then, stepping into the office like a man who already knew the outcome of the conversation. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes narrowing at her. "He's right, you know," Thorne said. "You can pretend you're a ghost drifting base to base, watching, but that's not who you are. Ghosts don't climb 90-foot walls in a blizzard. Ghosts don't drag men back from the edge of death. That's not silence, Lara, that's service." Her jaw clenched. She looked from Thorne to Madsen, then back again. "You both think this is about what I can do. It's not." "Then what is it about?" Thorne asked, his voice pressing hard. Her throat tightened. The bandage on her calf burned as if the scar beneath had been cut open again. "It's about what I failed to do," she said finally. The room stilled. Even Madsen, hard and severe, paused at that. Her voice was low, almost lost in the hum of the heater. "Kandahar, nightfall, I saved one, I left another, and I've carried it every day since. You call me Wraith, you talk about legend, but legends don't limp. Legends don't bleed. Legends don't fail." Silence filled the space like a tide. Madsen exhaled slowly, the truth of her words settling like weight on stone. Thorne's face softened, though his voice remained firm. "You think you're the only one who's failed. Every man who ever lived in this uniform carries ghosts. The difference is you don't get to hide behind yours forever. You've got more to give. And whether you like it or not, these soldiers know it." She turned her eyes away, unwilling to let either of them see the fracture in her armor. "I leave tomorrow," she said quietly. Madsen's lips parted as if to protest, but she didn't give him the chance. She lifted her duffel, straightened her posture, and walked out. The next morning she stood on the frozen landing pad, her bag at her feet. The helicopter waited, its rotors turning slow and steady, sending snow swirling in lazy spirals. She didn't look at it, she looked at the mountains. Their peaks glittered, sharp and endless. Behind her, soldiers gathered. Riley, Diaz, Chun, O'Connell, and others who had once ignored her entirely. They didn't crowd close. They stood at a distance, silent, watching. They didn't salute this time. They didn't need to. The silence was enough. Lara reached down, touched her calf lightly where the bandage wrapped tight. Not in pain, in acknowledgement. The helicopter's ramp lowered. She didn't turn back. Because turning back would mean staying. And staying meant facing the truth that she wasn't just observing anymore. And she couldn't, not yet. The blades roared, snow lifting in violent swirls. She stepped forward, duffel slung over her shoulder, and disappeared into the machine. The soldiers kept watching, even as the helicopter lifted, even as it became a dot against the horizon. Because when a ghost leaves, you don't look away. You wonder when or if it will ever return. Why did leaving feel like betrayal, even when it was the only choice? The helicopter's rotors thundered as Lara sat in the rear compartment, her duffel at her feet, her body braced against the vibration. Snow whipped past the open ramp before it closed, sealing her inside the machine's metallic belly. The sound was deafening, the kind that drowned thought but not memory. She leaned her head back against the cold wall and closed her eyes. The climb replayed in fragments, the ladder swaying under Diaz, Chun froze in mid-rung, Riley's doubt etched in his jawline. Then the storm swallowing everything. The wall alive beneath her hands. The silence in the command post as she reached the top. And then the ravine. The ropes. Jenkins' pale face. The anchors that had to hold. The voices of soldiers young enough to be her sons, obeying her without hesitation when hours earlier they had mocked her like children. They saluted her. Not because they had to, because something in them had shifted. She exhaled slowly, her breath clouding faintly in the cold cabin air. Respect was heavy and undeserved. The bandage on her calf throbbed as if reminding her of Kandahar, of the man she hadn't saved. She pressed her fingers to it, not with anger, not with grief, just acknowledgement. Some wounds never closed. The helicopter shuddered as it banked, revealing through the small porthole the jagged white teeth of the mountains below. From above they looked eternal, immovable. But Lara knew better. Even mountains eroded. Even stone carried scars. She opened her eyes and stared at the horizon. Behind her, Fob Kestrel shrank, its walls already half buried in snow again. From this distance it looked small, but inside those walls something had changed, not just for her but for them. Down on the ground, silence lingered long after the helicopter faded into the sky. Sergeant Riley stood with his arms crossed, eyes locked on the vanishing speck. His men Diaz, Chun, O'Connell, and the others hovered nearby, each caught between awe and unease. Finally Diaz spoke, his voice low, stripped of swagger. She climbed that wall like the storm itself couldn't touch her. Chun shook his head slowly. That wasn't climbing, that was something else, like she knew the wall, like she'd done it 1,000 times before. O'Connell's eyes were wide, still carrying the tremor of fear but also something new, determination. She told me everyone has their own wall to climb. I think she meant more than this one. Riley's jaw flexed. He had heard stories before, whispers about a ghost who could move where no one else dared, who could solve problems no one else could touch. He had dismissed them like all soldiers dismissed myths, but now he wasn't so sure. "She's Wraith," he said finally, the words heavy in the cold air, "and we'll never see her like again." The recruits fell silent, the name settling over them like frost. Colonel Madsen stood a few paces away, hands behind his back, his eyes narrowed at the horizon. He had offered her a place and she had walked away. For a man like him, steeped in order and regulation, it was almost unthinkable. Yet he didn't feel anger. He felt respect, and something deeper. "Loss." He turned to Riley. "Train them well, Sergeant. She showed us what's possible. Don't let them forget it." Riley nodded once, his expression grim with the weight of responsibility. Thorne lingered at the edge of the group, his weathered face unreadable. He had known Lara longer than any of them, had fought beside her in places these young men couldn't even imagine. He had seen her disappear once before, swallowed by silence. And now, watching the helicopter vanish, he knew this wouldn't be the last time. She wasn't meant to be caged. Not by bases, not by ranks, not by ghosts. "Wraith doesn't stay," he murmured mostly to himself. "She moves, that's who she is." The soldiers didn't hear him. They were still staring at the sky. Inside the helicopter, Lara finally let her eyes close again. The drone of the rotors blurred into rhythm, steady and relentless. She allowed herself, just for a moment, to drift into memory. The face of Jenkins as he was lifted to safety, the flicker of hope in O'Connell's eyes, Riley's silent salute. And then the face she could never forget, Kandahar, the one she hadn't saved, the ghost that followed every step. Her heart tightened, but she forced herself to breathe past it, in, out, controlled. Because the truth was simple, even if it hurt. She wasn't a commander anymore. She wasn't a savior, she was Wraith. She was just a woman with scars, moving from place to place, solving problems others couldn't, then leaving before anyone asked her to stay. It was the only way she knew how to keep going. The helicopter carried her further into the mountains, the peaks stretching on endlessly. She didn't know where she would land next. She never did. But she knew this much. Somewhere out there, another wall waited, another storm, another soldier who didn't yet know they could climb. And when the time came, she would be there. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because it was the only way to keep her ghosts quiet. Why do legends never say goodbye, only vanish? The helicopter touched down at a forward staging airstrip hours later. The storm had broken, leaving the world glazed in white silence. Soldiers bustled across the tarmac, but none approached her as she stepped down with her duffel slung across one shoulder. She was a stranger here, just another shadow passing through. A transport waited to take her further down the mountain. The pilot gave a brief nod, but she didn't climb aboard right away. She stood on the frozen pad, the wind tugging at her hair, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Behind her, the machine idled ready. Ahead, the mountains stretched in jagged brilliance. She inhaled the sharp, frozen air. It burned, but it was clean. The pain in her leg pulsed with every heartbeat. She pressed her fingers lightly against the bandage, not in weakness, in acknowledgement, a map of her past, a scar she carried openly, a reminder that every climb had its price. She didn't regret it, not the storm, not the ravine, not even the silence she carried from Kandahar. But regret and failure were different things. She had failed once, and she had lived with it every day since. That was why she never stayed, why she never accepted a place, no matter how much men like Madsen or Thorne tried to offer her one, because to stay meant to lead meant to fail again, and she wouldn't allow herself to bear that weight twice. So she moved on, always. She tightened the strap on her duffel and climbed into the transport. Back at Fob Kestrel, the world had shifted. Sergeant Riley stood in the yard with his recruits. The wall loomed behind them, glittering with ice, its angles sharper under morning light. But today, they didn't face it the same way. Riley's voice was still thunder, still commanding, but there was something different in his tone now, a weight, a respect, a hint of humility that hadn't been there before. Diaz climbed again, but slower this time, more efficient. He conserved energy, his movements deliberate. Chun followed, his breathing steadier, his caution balanced by determination. And O'Connell, the boy who had once frozen 20 feet up, forced himself higher than ever before, his jaw clenched, fear still in his eyes but no longer ruling him. Riley watched them, and in his mind he heard her voice. Smooth, calm, certain. Everyone has their own wall to climb, find a different way up. He barked corrections, but his eyes flicked once toward the horizon, toward where the helicopter had vanished. Colonel Madsen returned to his office, but it no longer felt the same. The tactical maps on the wall, the files stacked on his desk, they were unchanged, yet he felt altered. He had saluted her, a civilian at least on paper, a woman he had mocked not 48 hours before. He still didn't fully understand it. But he knew this, she had shown him something he had missed. Readiness wasn't just muscle, it wasn't just drills, it was resilience, adaptability, the ability to see what others ignored. She had seen his soldiers more clearly in one morning than he had in months. And now, whether she stayed or not, her imprint lingered. Thorne remained behind for another day, overseeing reports, giving his formal nod to Madsen's command. But his thoughts weren't on paperwork. His thoughts were on her. He had seen Lara disappear before, had believed her gone for good. Now he knew better. She wasn't gone. She was out there somewhere, climbing another wall, solving another problem, carrying ghosts no one else could see. He smiled faintly, shaking his head. Some people were built for permanence, others for passage. Lara Vance's Wraith was built to move. And perhaps that was the only way she could survive herself. That night at Kestrel, the recruits whispered, not mocking now, but reverent. The story spread faster than fire across cold wood. The woman with the bandaged leg, the liaison who wasn't a liaison, the climber who scaled the wall faster than the storm itself, the ghost called Wraith. They didn't know the whole truth. They didn't need to. Myths didn't demand accuracy, only belief. And belief was what she left behind. Far away in another valley, the transport dropped her at a convoy heading further south. She shouldered her bag, moving quietly, blending with the churn of soldiers and supplies. To them, she was no one. just another face. That was how she preferred it. But as she walked, her steps steady despite the ache in her leg, she let herself remember one last image, 100 hands saluting her in the storm's aftermath. Not for glory, not for rank, but for truth. The truth that resilience was silent, that strength didn't need to shout. The convoy moved. She blended into its rhythm, another shadow among many. She didn't look back, she never did. Because some journeys don't end where they begin, and some walls aren't meant to be conquered, only climbed, one more time. The mountains loomed ahead, endless, cold, unyielding. And Lara Vance, Wraith, walked toward them without hesitation. Because ghosts don't rest. They endure. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.